Hello everyone. This video is going to provide you with some strategies on how to develop body paragraphs for your academic essays. First, I would like to begin by stating that not all body paragraphs are going to be the same. One of the things to consider with body paragraphs, of course, is the role and purpose for them. Before we get into all of what a body paragraph entails, its purpose, how they look, how to integrate quotations, I want to first address that the purpose of each body paragraph is going to be dependent on a couple of factors. So, first, we would need to consider that the body paragraph is predominantly informed by the thesis statement. Furthermore, the body paragraph is also going to be informed by the rhetorical situation that has been established by you. So, if you are unfamiliar with what I mean by the rhetorical situation, please make sure to go back and watch the video that is entitled The Rhetorical Situation, which would give you a sense of the steps and aspects to consider before we even begin to sit to write. Next, the thesis statement. So the thesis statement, as you know, and if you are unfamiliar again, one should go back and watch the thesis statement video, which will give you some insight as to what it is, how to develop it effectively, and the role it plays within an academic essay. As far as the body paragraph is concerned, number one, we have to already know that there are no limits. And what I mean by no limits are there is no sense of structure, precision, number of sentences, number of paragraphs one should have, because writing is always evolving, and the kind of paper that you're writing, the purpose that you're writing it for, the audience, the nature of the thesis statement, how complex it is or how simple it is all going to dictate the first kinds of body paragraphs you need, but also what they're going to look like, how they should look in the sense of the organizational pattern that they take on, as well as, of course, and you see there on your screen, the notion of evidence and commentary. Once you have your thesis statement established, at that point as a writer, you kind of get the sense of what you need to achieve and what you promise to your reader, and whatever that entails is going to be fulfilled by the body paragraphs that you provide. Next, the body paragraph's purpose is to give space to you, the writer, to provide commentary. And again, keep in mind that the whole role of writing an academic paper is just that. We are not simply just piecing together what other people say, but more of incorporating your commentary, which really looks like analysis, synthesis, argument. So all of those elements are going to be included in that commentary that is housed within the body paragraphs. Furthermore, like with anything else revolving around argument, is that you're going to need supporting evidence. The concept of evidence itself is complex. We will get into that momentarily. But for the most part, just know that for every body paragraph that you have, if the purpose of that body paragraph is to provide some proof, support, commentary in the form of analysis, synthesis, or any of those, you're going to need evidence that is included. And again, the concept of evidence is more than just statistics and information, and we'll get into that in a moment. Finally, body paragraphs really provide the, quote, conversation between the author text and the writer. In a sense, when you are entering a conversation, like in the concept of the they say, I say text, we are entering a conversation, a context, if you will, which the body paragraph is going to serve as points within those conversations. And in a way, it'll allow the reader to know exactly what aspects of the much larger conversation you're having. Keep in mind, when you write an essay, you're not able to cover all elements of a particular topic because, quite simply, it's just far too complex to do that, which is why we write and we continue to research and we continue to move the conversation forward in the sense of the way in which and purpose of why we are writing the essay that we are. So, before I begin in addressing some of the characteristics of a strong body paragraph, as well as these same characteristics in which I will be evaluating your work, is to know that all body paragraphs are not always going to include some of these characteristics, but for most academic writing, you will find that it will. These particular characteristics and the framework that I'm going to provide to you is going to work and pair well nicely with the they say, I say templates. And again, keep in mind that as you continue to write more throughout your academic career, these strategies will evolve, as well as your skill set as a writer will evolve also. These characteristics and strategies are simply a stepping stone to much more complicated text, but for the nature of this class, this will be a good framework to follow as far as helping you get your ideas organized and getting into the flow, if you will, of how to write an academic paper. And I can tell you from personal experience as a person who writes research and who writes within the academic environment constantly, we don't evolve too far off from these characteristics and strategies. So if you can kind of master this sort of approach, then writing in the academic spaces shouldn't be too challenging later on. Let's go ahead and get started. First, as far as characteristics are concerned, we always need to have a topic sentence, okay? Now, a good way to think about body paragraphs is almost as if they are smaller conversations that you are having with someone. So, for a moment, I would like you to visualize yourself and picture yourself having a conversation with a friend. Here's what we don't see. We don't see a friend coming up to us and saying, hey, for example. Well, we don't know what they're for exampling about, right? We don't see a friend coming up saying, yeah, that was so weird, right? And then run off. Well, here's the issue with those two things. Number one, we don't have a context. Number two, we don't know what they're talking about. And of course, number three, their ideas are sort of all over the place and it's very difficult to follow. In that same visualization, I ask you, what would ideal conversation look like between you and this friend? Probably one, they would come up to you and say something like either an observation, something they heard, a reaction that they had, or some other sort of commentary about something that they experienced. Then they would bring that to your attention. For instance, they might come up and say, did you see that video that was posted on Twitter about blah, blah, blah? At that moment, we are starting the process of the topic sentence / controlling idea, which means that your friend has now controlled the conversation that you are about to have. And in a sense, you will need to do the same thing. In other words, the body paragraph needs to be controlled via a topic sentence specifically designed by you as it refers to the thesis statement or the much larger conversation you're having. What I mean by that is, if your thesis statement, let's say, is arguing why students should not go back to school in the fall 2020 because of the coronavirus fears, well, you are going to need to provide miniature conversations about why that is. So, for instance, your first body paragraph might include one of the points, meaning friend that you're going up to have this conversation. You will say, let's talk about this first. Now, naturally, you're not going to write that, but you're going to develop a topic sentence and a controlling idea that lets them know that, right? So, once you have that topic sentence, it's quite nice for the reader because then they know, okay, so this is what we're going to address first. Then they can prepare their own ideas, meaning they're going to start gathering what they know about it. They're going to start listening to you to see what connections that they can make. examples that they may have, because remember that anytime you bring up a point of conversation to someone, and especially in an academic environment, tends to be argumentative, they're going to be ready to respond, and that's how they get started. But if you don't have a clear controlling idea, topic, sentence, this conversation you're about to have is going to get out of control really quickly. It's also going to get off topic really quickly as well. So for those of you who have stated that you tend to get off topic with your writing, a large part of that is that there is no control in the body paragraphs, in the sense of controlling how you're going to want to present the points of conversation of your thesis. Next, explanations. So going back to the visualization about having a conversation with your friend, explanations, if they're needed, depending on your audience, of course, but explanations are great because number one, it lets the reader or listener know how you are processing that information, how you're thinking about it, what you know about it. If we don't have explanations, you are assuming that the reader understands the topic or position the way that you do. And we cannot have assumptions when it comes to writing. We need clarity so that way when there is a response to your writing, or if you're having this conversation in person, it could address exactly what it is that you are bringing up. So an explanation could be something that's lengthy or short. It's really going to depend on what you're going to be talking about. So for instance, going back to the original example about whether or not schools should meet in person in the fall of 2020, if your first point is due to, let's say, this body paragraph is going to be about the risks that are involved health-wise, okay? So if I just say it is too risky for students to go back to school fall 2020 because they might get sick. Well, we have now addressed the concept of risk, and we also addressed getting sick. This needs to be explained. Well, what do you mean by risks? What do you mean by getting sick? Okay. So that all needs to be explained rather clearly, so that way when we now go into the next aspect, evidence, we need to make sure as your reader to hold you accountable to the explanation you provided, as well as the evidence that you're going to use to support that. So explanations are controlled by you. Again, this is the aspect of, quote, commentary that I referred to earlier. This is your words. This is your voice. This is how you're thinking about it. And that needs to come through within those body paragraphs. Next, evidence. So I mentioned earlier that evidence can be quite complex. And for a moment, I want to address the concept of evidence before we move forward. And that way we get a better understanding of how we might be including evidence in our writing, as well as what it might potentially look like. But first, I want to address the rhetorical aspects of evidence very clearly, because what we have to avoid is simply saying as a student, oh, I just need to go get outside sources and then stick it in there and then it'll be fine. It does not work like that. So let's take a moment to look at evidence from a rhetorical situation. When I explain evidence, I like to use the Beam model. And the Beam model uses the notion of rhetorical situation or rhetorical approach to why you're going to give evidence to begin with, okay? So we have 4 ways in which we want to use these outside sources. So for a moment, when I say evidence, I want to step away from that term because that's a specific purpose. So as far as outside sources, meaning you going out to research, getting information from somewhere else, you're going to have 4 ways in which this is done, or the purposes for why they are done. So the first, of course, is background. Background information is not information that is arguable in a sense, or background information is not going to be used to prove something. Simply, background information in regards to outside sources is simply to give context, to provide facts, or to present authoritative information. How will we know how you're presenting the outside source as a reader. Well, it's going to be in the ways in which you introduce this information. We're going to talk about that in a separate video as far as integrating outside sources, but for right now, it's all about how you phrase something. So let's say, for instance, that you want to refer to a tweet that was tweeted out by, let's say, the President of the United States, right? And let's say he creates a tweet that simply says a statement. Well, we don't know how you're going to be introducing that tweet within your writing, or as a reader, I won't know until you tell me how to process that information. So as far as background information is concerned, if you say, the other day the president tweeted X, and then provided that information, for your reader, so that way you're going to be arguing something about it. Well, that's different than if you're going to show that tweet as evidence, okay? So background information simply is just that. You need to provide background because part of the reason is you want to show your credibility as a writer, that you understand something more clearly, or you want to present your credibility to your audience in that you know what it is that you are talking about, okay? Next, exhibits. So exhibits means to analyze, to interpret, to include evidence in the sense of not always proof per se, but that is one aspect of it. So using that same tweet, okay, you are going to be using it to show your readers how you're interpreting that. Now, naturally, and the president is notorious for this, sometimes vague tweets or tweets that can be interpreted or understood in different ways. Well, because of that reason, you as the author needs to provide that interpretation / explanation of how you see it or how you understand it. If you do not provide that explanation, then us as readers do not know what we're supposed to do with that. So simply just to throw in outside sources is not enough. Are you using that outside source to analyze what he says, to interpret, or are you using it as proof of something? And even the way you say it's proof of something, how you explain what that something is still a sense of interpretation on your end. Next, you have for argumentative sakes. So if you are to include outside sources in this same example of a tweet, are you going to argue what he says? Are you going to refute it? Are you going to affirm it, agree? Are you going to disagree? Or are you going to add to what he has to say? Okay. So if you're going to do any argumentative elements, you might say, I agree with the president, or like the president said, I feel, and then you incorporate whatever, it is that you are trying to do. And again, consider the purpose. What's the point? Okay. Finally, methods. Method is going to be revolving around definitions or terminology or concepts that are very specific. So are you taking these outside sources or information in order to explain something in a way that you cannot? Okay. Now, on the left-hand side here, you can see the types of what the sources generally look like for these different purposes. So you see here primary sources and secondary sources. And there are going to be 2 videos that you can watch, one that talks about the difference between the two. And then you'll have a better understanding of how they work each more, in a sense, specifically for exhibits as far as primary sources are concerned. And then secondary sources are more for argumentative sake. Those are going to be things like articles, opinions, scholarly work, things like that. Okay. Once you have these, again, when we think about the body paragraph specifically, for instance, we can see then that the evidence is going to vary on what your purposes might be for this particular body paragraph. Okay, so going back then, you'll see that explanation is reappearing once again. So this time, after you introduce your evidence, and however many you need, explanation is needed about that evidence. And for the very reason that I just addressed, is that we need to know as your reader what and how we should process that information. If you don't explain the evidence, we don't know the purpose. And again, The explanation is key because, again, this is where your commentary is and how you're going to tie it all together back to not only your topic sentence, but also your thesis statement. This is the focal point, of course, where the body paragraph is. How do you want us to process this information? Okay. As far as other characteristics are concerned, we need to ensure that we use clear language, that the wording is easy to understand, and again, that it is logical and reasonable, meaning that the ideas connect. So as I'm reading your body paragraphs, that's what I am essentially doing. Does the topic sentence and controlling idea present and support the thesis statement? Are the explanations clear? The evidence that's presented for this topic sentence logically support using the rhetorical reasons why you're including that evidence? And then are those pieces of evidence explained clearly and thoroughly as well? Okay. Now, while you have these characteristics here, then we have to also consider the writing aspect of it. Okay. So one of the concepts that I like to introduce is entitled or the acronym TEXAS. The TEXAS format is a good acronym to have in the back of your mind as you are starting to develop your body paragraphs. So as far as the TEXAS format is concerned, we can look at T standing for topic sentence, E for explain, X stands for all your examples and evidence, A for analysis, which essentially is your explanation of the evidence, and S for summary, significance, or so what factor. So how are you wrapping up the body paragraph in a way that you want to reiterate something? What was the purpose of this whole body paragraph? And that's also a final opportunity to communicate to your reader what you want them to take away from that body paragraph. Okay. Now, the TEXAS format, because it sort of provides a framework of reminding you of what elements and characteristics you need to touch on, works rather nicely with the they say, I say text. So for a moment, and this document is available to you under the modules, you will briefly realize that on the right-hand side, you're going to see some of those templates that Graf and Birkenstein address in their textbook. And what I've done in this particular document is provided you with some of the templates that might serve well for some of the tenets or characteristics of the body paragraph. So for instance, the topic sentence, how are you going to enter the conversation and present the controlling idea? So you can say things like, it's often said that, or the problem facing this, or to begin, or many people assume, whatever it is. Generally the topic sentence is a little bit more free of templates, but you can use some of these to begin to present the ideas. As far as explanation is concerned, you can use some of these intro statements. You can say things like, in other words, or actually, to put it another way, basically the author is stating that depending on what you're doing in that body paragraph, the type of template that you incorporate is going to help your readers understand. And of course, examples or evidence, you can use some of the following to highlight, to demonstrate. Now, these are incredibly important and not to be taken lightly because, as I said before, when you use outside sources, how you're framing them or introducing them is going to tell your reader how to process it or the purpose. So is the statement you're going to use before you introduce the outside source giving us background information? Is it going to be serving as an exhibit, an argumentative aspect, a method? Whatever it is, you'll need to be precise with your language. And again, this is what I will be looking for in your writing. Finally, you have the last two with the analysis. You can say things like, this matters, or to make this connection, or this shows that, or this illustrates, whatever it is, it's telling us and giving us that explanation of that evidence to be more clear. And then finally, of course, you have some summary significance. So what statements here that you can use as well. Now, don't be afraid to start using these, because I, in a sense, kind of call them training wheels just to get you started in organizing your ideas, because sometimes that's the hardest part. Where do I put the information that I have in my head and also the information I found in my outside sources? So in that regard, you'll want to be mindful of how you're stating things, because everything matters in a body paragraph, everything you say. So the moment you get off track, your readers are going to get off track as well. Okay, so let's look at an example. So let's go ahead and look at a potential sample body paragraph, specifically as it relates to essay number 1. So 3 aspects that you need to be included in essay number 1 is whose perceptions, how do you know, so this is going to be your evident proof or support, and why do they hold these perceptions. And we're going to implement the Texas format as well as some of the templates from the They Say, I Say text. So keep in mind, again, the purpose. So we know that we're writing for essay 1, the body paragraphs are going to present the different perceptions that you are including as far as the assignment requirements are concerned. For this case, we already know what type of evidence we're going to need, and that's going to be from primary source material, which is going to be the quotes and, of course, the perceptions that are held by the people that you ask or wherever you get them from. So let's go ahead and look. The topic sentence first. Many millennials tend to perceive tattoos as part of one's identity. So right away in this topic sentence, I have the controlling idea. Number 1, I know that I'm focusing on the millennials' perspectives, as well as the key idea that they perceive tattoos as identity. Okay, so now from here, I need to explain the concept of identity. Well, what do I mean by that? Or in other words, what do they mean by that? And this is going to be your interpretation of their perspectives, what they said. So the explanation might be, they perceive those who have tattoos as people choosing to share a part of their life story with those around them. Now, if you're writing choosing to share a part of their life story, well, now you've made it very clear to your reader that the concept of identity is about somebody's life story and who they are. Okay. Now, the evidence should show that. Now, you're going to show proof that this is how they see it. So you will say, for instance, one person interviewed indicated that she takes pride in her tattoos and they are an extension of who she is as a woman. She states that her tattoos are an instant reflection of who she is. Okay. That is evidence. That is a paraphrase of what somebody said, because let's say hypothetically you interviewed her. So does that go back and address life story? Absolutely, because she's talking about how the woman is that these tattoos are an extension of herself, going back to the concept of identity. So as a reader, I can say, yes, that makes sense. That notions of tattoos for this millennial group tend to be about identity. Then you're going to provide another explanation of this evidence. This shows that for her, tattoos directly tied to moments in her life which were significant enough for her to remember via body artwork. This would be, again, your commentary about what she said. Finally, her own experiences of having tattoos and explaining them to those who are interested to ask means that her story and life matter. This is your synthesis. This is what you think about it. Okay. Now, again, I remind you that this body paragraph is solely for the concept of essay 1, but how and what you fill this information with, topic, sentence, explanation, is all going to go back to what your thesis statement is, the purpose of your paper, and what you're aiming to achieve by the end of your essay.